Thank you. Thank you. As the lead for the economic equity portfolio at Bloomberg Philanthropies called the Greenwood Initiative, it is my absolute pleasure to be in conversation with two mayors who are making it their business to prioritize Black wealth accumulation, introduce innovative policy change, and leverage public-private partnerships in a dynamic way. Good afternoon, mayors.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Two alphas, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
True.
I thought I was going to mention that.
Now that you bring it up.
Yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
okay, fair enough. Where I want to start this conversation is just in the data. We funded the Black Wealth Data Center because we feel and know that leaders like you're the CEOs of your community, and you need data to make evidence-based decisions, particularly around this issue. And we recognize the huge data gap, and we wanted to make sure that there was available data disaggregated by race down to the zip code level that you could find and your teams could find at your fingertips. How important has data been to you personally in a leadership capacity, but also to your teams with some of the work that you're doing to help close the racial wealth gap?
I'll go. Thank you for the invitation here. It's an honor to be here with you. Data is absolutely critical because without the data, we don't know what we're doing. We don't know what we're achieving. We don't know what progress we're making. My team laughs because they hear me say all the time on critical things like economic empowerment, public safety, some of those things. I always tell them if an article doesn't have the word standard deviation in it, don't send it to me. Because this is too important. We shoot from the hip on all these things. In City Hall, there's essentially two kinds of problems. There's policy problems and there's political problems. If something's a political problem, our goal, the solution is just to change the conversation and talk about something else. But a policy problem won't go away that easily. A policy problem requires kind of deep thinking. I heard Mr. Candidate say just earlier about all of these ways in which our solution to generational problems is literally to do more of the exact same things that we've always done in communities of color, particularly in our African American communities. That doesn't work, but it requires the data to be able to demonstrate that that doesn't work and to be able to demonstrate that there are alternative approaches to it.
It's critical. I think it was former Mayor Mike Bloomberg who said, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it.
That's right.
Particularly in this era where we as mayors, despite the federal investment we're seeing in our cities, we have finite resources. Mm-hmm. So we have to use data to inform how we're putting resources in our respective communities. And for us in Cleveland, it's been a big challenge. I inherited a government that hadn't had a new mayor in nearly 2 decades. We had employees that were still using Windows 7 and Windows 10. And we currently don't have any of our systems in the cloud. And so we are trying to modernize our organization to be data-driven internally. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, when I took office, we had some of the worst outcomes for Black folks in our city. We were ranked in 2020 as the worst city in the country for Black women. We're the second poorest big city in America. And so the data is clear. But if we don't have the right data-driven solutions to solve these problems, we're going to be leading without the right intentionality to really make long-term systemic change in our respective cities. Absolutely.
I want to go right to some of the solutions that you are, some of the programs and policies that you're implementing. But before I do that, I would be remiss if I did not bring up that you all are doing something that was talked about in the last panel and really moving with political courage to prioritize Black folks. And really saying and being intentional about these programs and policies and their potential benefit to the Black community. How difficult is that? I know you have a lot of resistance that probably comes from anywhere and everywhere, but could you share with the audience today a little bit about that?
Well, one of the things I campaigned on nearly 2 years ago was to make sure that we saw cranes in the sky in historically Black disinvested neighborhoods in Cleveland. Mm-hmm. After the Great Recession in our city, we saw nearly $10 billion of economic investment in downtown in the west side of our city, predominantly white parts of our community. Yet, in the neighborhood I grew up in, my house I grew up in, that my grandma bought for us, her housing value has yet to recover from the Great Recession in 2008. She passed away last summer, and this asset was supposed to be that legacy wealth creation moment for our family. That hasn't happened yet.
Sure.
And that's the same story in parts of the east side of Cleveland. And so what we're trying to do is use this historic federal investment we've gotten from President Biden. And by the way, thank God we have a president who believes that we change this country one city at a time. And we want to use this money to make sure that we give Black folks the tools to not only build back the block, but buy back the block. And that's how you create that long-term systemic change, I believe.
You know, you started talking about data, and sadly, the data always brings us back to our African-American communities. I remember when I first ran for city council, I told folks, you know, Minnesota, we're really proud of our state. We're proud of being a healthy state, a home ownership state, an education state, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I remember telling a group of folks, I love Minnesota so much, I want it in my neighborhood too.
I love that.
So my family's been in St. Paul for 100 years. Our family was, you know, we have a community called Old Rondo in St. Paul. You have it in New York community. It's just a different name. That's the community, and the historic, thriving African-American community that was uprooted to build a freeway. My grandparents owned over half a dozen commercial properties on Old Rondo. Long story short, I don't own over half a dozen commercial properties today.
Sure.
I grew up as a young Black man driving in our community. During the height of the Great Recession, if I stood on my front porch, 5 of the 6 houses closest to my front door were vacant and foreclosed. And so I bring, I think, into this office a fundamentally different lived experience than anybody who's ever held that office before. I tell folks all the time, I've probably had to tell my own children, get down on the floor, because I hear gunshots outside more than all of my predecessors combined ever had to. And so it creates, I think, both a different relationship with the challenges that we're trying to solve, but it also creates a different risk calculus because for me, as someone who's raising my children in that same city, the risk of these systems not changing is far higher than the risk of losing some votes.
And Mayor, can you, with such personal experience in the Rondo community, you've also prioritized it in your administration, and you have an initiative that could be a model for other communities around how to make reparative investments and strategic investments in communities that have been underinvested in for many years.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that work?
Absolutely. Yes, I will. Absolutely.
Thank you.
We call it the Inheritance Fund, and it's crazy because that legacy of Old Rondo that I talked about has been the subject of literally probably 2 decades now of public apologies from public decision makers and elected leaders. I can show you a study that says that legacy stole upwards of $150 million in today's dollars from our African American community. And so just saying, hey, sorry about that, $150 million only goes so far. So we just passed our city council last month. We created an initiative called the Inheritance Fund to provide direct descendants of Old Rondo with up to $110,000 in fully forgivable financing to either purchase or renovate an existing home. We see it as chapter 1. It's about helping to rebuild those those family inheritances that were gutted. And by the way, as we talk about, using city governments and using government structures to facilitate wealth creation, we're not starting from zero. We're starting from very negative legacies of these types of things that have happened all over the country. My father saw the St. Paul Fire Department burned out his parents' home as a training exercise after they were evicted. One of our neighbors saw his father was one of the last ones to leave, and the St. Paul Police Department came in with bats and destroyed everything and kicked them out. So, our municipal governments, our local governments have been on the front end of doing the opposite forever. So, that's why it's our job to help kind of replace that stolen wealth. So the first chapter is housing. We want to build at least 2 more chapters. One to help facilitate education. We're having conversations with university presidents along that university corridor, along that freeway corridor, to say what would it look like to make sure that education can be free for descendants of people who had properties taken from them, and also business creation. We have a lot of businesses. We have a lot of large businesses, a lot of large banks who are facilitated right along that corridor as well. And we want to tell them as well, we're glad you've been able to benefit from this legacy for a very long time, and we look forward to you chipping in to help address it.
Yeah. And what
Right?
what does that chip in look like? You have a number of different types of organizations represented here in the room. What would chipping in and investing in this area look like in your city?
We're still trying to figure out kind of exactly how to structure some of those things. One of the things that we're excited about that we're pursuing right now is what we call our local fund, is to facilitate local cooperative ownership models. We want to make St. Paul the cooperative capital of the world. I want to see more businesses owned by low-income employees and more housing buildings owned by low-income tenants per capita than anywhere in the world. So we can build this kind of shared economy. The way that we approach all of this, and I heard somebody talk about the decisions that are made about us but without us for so long. A lot of times we talk about equity, we don't really know what we're talking about. We don't really know what we mean. It's this amorphous concept. I went to business school at Florida A&M University, by the way. And my dean, when she was talking about equity, it wasn't social justice word at all. She was talking about money.
Yes.
She was talking about decision-making power. She was talking about shares of ownership of something I could transfer to my children and that'll appreciate over time. And she was talking about participation in an economy. If I own equity in a company, that company has a good quarter, I have a good quarter too. So all of what we do is centered around bringing public members into our decision-making processes and really sharing that public, even budgeting decision-making processes, facilitating asset accumulation and the inheritances that we were talking about. And so, I think one of the things that we're really bullish on and excited about that we're going to be looking to raise significant dollars for is to help us think through how we can facilitate low-income employees and low-income tenants pooling their dollars and coming up with financing to own the building that they live in, own the company that they work in.
And that cooperative ownership is a model that we're starting to see explored, at least in the U.S. more and more, and definitely has been explored in other countries. So we're excited about that in terms of local ways that we can create wealth creation. I'm going to come to you, Mayor Carter, you have chosen a very specific community that has had lots of debate in the city, but also could be a center for commerce to open up in your city. How important is the East Side, and how have you leveraged the ARPA funding even to start to think about new policies and programs?
It's a big reason why I quit my job in banking to run for mayor. When I was growing up in Cleveland, Cleveland Southeast Side at one time was a beacon of the Black middle class. I remember hearing my grandma talk about the farmers markets they would go to, the businesses that they owned in the neighborhood. And unfortunately, that's not the case anymore. And, one of the things that I really realized is the importance of housing stability is the anchor of our cities and the anchor of our neighborhoods. And I experienced that because when my parents got divorced when I was 4, thank God my grandma had a nice little duplex we could go to, because that was our reset moment. And what we're trying to do with the historic investments we've gotten from the American Rescue Plan is really think critically about how do we first defend the assets of our home ownership opportunities in Cleveland. In Cleveland, we have an historic issue around the lead paint crisis. And many of our children are off to a rough start because they are poisoned by lead at the age of 3, 4, 5 years old, which leads to learning disabilities, which leads to them dropping out at middle school and high school, which leads to them to get caught up in violent crime. And so we leveraged $17 million from our ARPA funding to raise an additional $50 million from the Cleveland Clinic to fully fund the city's first ever lead-safe housing endowment to make sure that no child in Cleveland is ever poisoned by lead paint ever again. The second thing, though, is many of our seniors, they don't make enough money or not bankable enough to get a home equity line of credit, but they're getting all these benefits. So the benefit cliff doesn't allow them to get good government assistance to get home repair funding.
That's right.
And so we put $120 million of our ARPA money to say, how do we have a housing for all agenda to give our seniors good grant funding to get that new roof fixed, to get a new garage, to redo that kitchen so that their home can appreciate and value over time. The last thing that's so important is we as mayors must continue to learn from the Maynard Jackson School of Government.
That's right. That's right.
And we can't afford the excuse to say there's no good prime contractor to develop our neighborhoods. We got to build that pipeline. And so we put together a $5 million access to capital fund to fund minority developers to do that home rehab in the neighborhoods so they can build and scale over time. Mm-hmm. And so I believe that our respective cities can be that laboratory to show us how to actually create real Black generational wealth over time. But you got to start small and scale and be very intentional with how you do it.
I know that both of you all have at least experimented with things like children's savings accounts. You all both are part of guaranteed income and explored that. Are there other models and solutions that you see working in other communities that you're excited about at least exploring in your own?
Well, I want to just steal an idea that Mayor Carter has really taken the lead on around a guaranteed income program. I talked about the dire data that we have in Cleveland around Black women. We're going to be launching our first ever commission for Black women and Black girls in Cleveland. And we want to do a dedicated guaranteed income program to give single Black women that uplift they need to start a business, particularly those living in public housing. Because what we see is we have a public housing system in this country that perpetuates that cycle.
That's right.
Which is unfortunate. And we have to do a better job of reimagining the entire benefits apparatus to change that. And we want to use entrepreneurship as that vehicle to uplift our city. Because if I can make sure that Cleveland is a city where Black women are thriving, the whole city's going to thrive.
That's right.
And I think a guaranteed income program dedicated to uplifting Black women can be that potential solution.
Mayor Carter, you've talked about how critics have sometimes said that some of the initiatives are anti-business. Talk to us about that. We have a lot of business people in the room.
Yeah, a lot of times when we talk about, I fundamentally believe that we've inherited what I think of as a broken model of city building. And this broken model of city building tells us if we need a road, just pave it over people's homes and you'll be fine. If we need to be safe, just lock up all the young Black and brown boys that you can find and you'll be fine. If you want economic development, just go look out of town somewhere and find a business or find a worker and lure them to come in. While you have just unlimited human potential that exists right under our nose that could be invested in, that could thrive if we invest in it. So our goal, and people get mad at us, rightfully so, because they know that historic model leads to us always betting against ourselves, betting against them. I'm from Minnesota, and I've heard the name George Floyd mentioned here today. My office is about 12 minutes from where he was murdered. And I fundamentally believe that when we saw that global uprising of people just expressing their outrage, it wasn't just about police violence against an unarmed Black man. It was against all of the different ways in which we perceive our education systems, our housing systems, our employment systems, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that we pay into with the promise that they're gonna help us raise our children that just feel like they have their knee on our neck. And so, all that to say is, we have this fundamental space, and Jeff Canada was talking earlier about the things that we're used to. And we end up operating within our comfort zone, but we're used to so many processes that are producing outcomes that we abhor, that we absolutely hate. So we have to decide where our allegiance is going to be, and if we're uncomfortable enough with these outcomes to actually change these processes that we're used to. When we do something like guaranteed income, people who fashion themselves as fiscal conservatives go, "Oh, that's anti-business. That's not what we look at." When we do things like our college savings accounts initiative, we launched a college savings accounts initiative in St. Paul, where we start every child born in our city with $50 in a college savings account. I love telling moms in our city, if you have a baby and you don't want your child to have a college savings account, there's an application to fill out. There's paperwork to fill out. But it's a...
It took a moment for us to get that.
Because we really mean every child.
Yeah, opt out.
We really mean every child. It's an opt out. But I say it just to say is, I think our anti-poverty work has failed because it's based on a faulty premise. Mayor Bibb was talking about our guaranteed income work. We've built it around the premise that people are poor because they lack character. Sure. When in fact, people are poor because they lack money. In fact, I mean, I'm serious.
Right.
Like, there is no better money manager in America, sorry, than those black moms that
That's
Justin
facts.
was
Yeah.
talking about.
Facts. They would rob Peter to pay Paul, but it would get done.
That's right. They'll figure it out. And so this is about, so all of the things that I'm constantly stealing from other cities, it's what my job is to figure out what he's doing and figure out how we can do it in
Yes.
St. Paul. But what I really get excited about is things that put not just dollars in people's hands, but put trust in their hands and say, we believe that you know what your children need. We believe that you know how to invest in your family. And by the way, you look at guaranteed income, people, why would anybody work anymore if you're giving out free money? Well, I never heard anybody say that who could quit their day job for $500 a month. Mm-hmm. But that is to say, the research is showing us, and we started on data, and I want to end on data, the research shows us that those families in our experimental groups, and we've got over 4 dozen experiments that's going on across the country right now with over 100 mayors, and what we're finding out is that people who get just this $500 a month are significantly more likely to gain employment. Not only are they not quitting their job, but they're significantly more likely to gain employment. You ask them why, and it becomes obvious. Say, I put my child in childcare. I fix up my truck. I could afford to take time off my part-time job to apply for a full-time job. And it's amazing the extent to which it's not just about adding money, it's about reprogramming the way we think about poverty, reprogramming the way we think about people in poverty in America, and recognizing them not as some impoverished person we need to do something for, but as this unlimited fount of human potential that we could be tapping into.
That's right. All right, I'm going to ask one last question, and that is, we've talked about how you've leveraged federal dollars and federal funding. With BEA kind of being out in front and these incredible business minds and investors that we have in the room, what would you say is a dynamic and really forward-thinking way that you would be looking forward to having partnership in your cities?
Something that's on my heart, and I know Mayor Carter can speak to this. Someone earlier mentioned that the folks that are committing the most violent crime in our cities are young black men, teenagers. I got a call last night after I got off the plane where 2 15-year-olds, one is dead, the other one in critical condition, in a shootout over a dispute. We probably get 3 or 4 calls like that a month in most major cities across this country. And I'm convinced that if the business leaders in this room get together with the majority of black mayors in America, we can figure out how to have a Marshall Plan to connect ending gun violence in our cities with true wealth creation and giving young black men the mentorship, the access to know that there's a way out. Because we can't police our way out of this problem. And if we don't solve it collectively in this room, it'll never get done. It will never get done. And what's unique is the 4 major cities of this country right now governed by black mayors. The majority of the nation's GDP are led by mayors leading America's countries, this nation. We can figure this out together if we come together as a people.
Mayor Carter?
We really can. It requires, and you mentioned having a president who knows that we build this country one city at a time. I fundamentally believe in cities as the laboratory of democracy. Mm-hmm. I tell folks all the time, you show me some amazing kind of cutting edge policy, public intervention, and I'll show you a mayor, city government, or some local government who's behind it and really trying to push it forward. But that is to say, even as mayors, we have these, people look at them as these large kind of city budgets. But the truth is, everything I have to spend next month is already, tied up to our police department, our fire department, our, whatever, something there. We end up having very little amount to be entrepreneurial with. Mm-hmm. And so when we think about shifting the way we do public safety, when we think about building optimal response, or alternative response units in 911 calls, when we think about how we connect those young people, not just to send them to jail after something happens, but how do we make sure there's an after school program for them before something happens so nothing ever happens in the first place. Our ability to be entrepreneurial and creative around things like that are very, very small. A lot of what we've talked about, we've said ARP a lot here today. Mm-hmm. A lot of the work that we've done where college savings savings accounts, guaranteed income, all of these things that we're doing which are entrepreneurial rely on either the ARP funding that we've been able to get to support and be entrepreneurial around, which is one-time funding that's going away, or our ability to come and talk to private philanthropy and kind of talk people into kind of helping us do some of those types of things. And so, and particularly in St. Paul, I'll tell you this, the fundraising base, nor the voter base necessarily pushes us in the direction that we're talking about right now. We have to bring people along really intentionally. And so I have this center of national capital that exists in this room that is organized around the passions that we're talking about right now, the opportunities that exist to partner with somebody like, somebody as brilliant as him, to say, how do we really create kind of solutions to these problems? And we don't know that they'll all be, Midas touch solutions. We don't know it'll all work. I tell folks all the time, the only thing I know for sure is what'll happen if we do things the same way as we've always done them.
That's right.
And so we don't know for sure that those things will work, but we need Mayor Bibb to have the opportunity to be entrepreneurial, to be creative, to try new solutions, to think about what we can scale, and to take the type of approach we heard from Jeffrey Canada, who said practices that haven't been successful yet.
Yes.
Because we're constantly failing forward and learning and revising it, because we stick to it and say we're not going to give up on it.
All right. As much as I could ask you a ton more questions, I see all zeros and they're blinking. So thank you to both of you. We started with data. I just want to end with a charge for the audience. We have the Black Wealth Data Center at blackwealthdata.org. And we are doing the hard work, and we have a full team that is working to try to get as much data in that platform as possible. So those of you who are working at companies, we're on corporate boards, we will be happy to have your partnership and also the transparency of different data sets so that we can help really define the solutions around this problem. So thank you.
Thank you.
Good stuff.